I'll leave that 5 minutes, Ian.
Sheena, because we're live. We're live streaming. 1, 2, eyes on you.
1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Hello, and welcome to day 2 of day 3 of the CCA Global Conference 2020. Oh, look, I'm just going to be totally honest with you. I didn't even know there was a day 3. And I haven't prepared a jot. And I'll be brutally frank with you. You know, I just don't know if I've got any more inspiration left to give. You know, I'm spent. It's hard to motivate at the best of times, but this year, God, just take the wheel, Ian. Just take the wheel.
But because of this year, we need optimism and positivity even more now. You know, people are stressed out. You know, they're fed up working out of their own homes. We are human beings and we need to connect. Right now, we need resilience and perspective. Right now, we need support. And Sheena. This too shall pass. And we will have your galvanizing nuggets once again.
Oh, Ian, this is inspirational. Who'd have thought? Ian, in a penny. Oh, you certainly inspired me to beyond belief. Oh, Ian, I feel like... Oh, do you think I should sing?
No.
Right. Listen, you go forth, you leaders in customer care, and ponder this. We are social creatures. And unlike Ian's jumper here, human beings will never go out of fashion. Climb every mountain for
Shut up. No. Have a good day.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Welcome to the final day of CCA Global Convention 2020. And thanks to Sheena and Ian of the National Theatre of Scotland for getting us off to a terrific start, but also for all of their input over the week. And if you've seen them Tuesday and Wednesday and now again today, you'll probably recognise that the relationship has gone through a little bit of a change. So if we ever see them again, it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic has developed. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm Liz Barclay and I'm the Director of CCA Global and Chair of the Standards Council. And I am delighted to be chairing the Convention 2020. And of course, this is our first digital convention. The theme of convention is Fast Forward 2021. And today we're asking the question, does digital first put the customer last? And that will be coming up later in our debate. We have another list of great speakers with seriously inspirational views and lots of experiences to share. A couple of housekeeping points. If you'd like to rename yourself, then you can click on the 3 dots on the right top corner of your tile with your details on. And if you want to see the speaker on your screen rather than the gallery, there is the option on the top right hand corner of your screen to change from gallery to speaker view. Now, I'd like to ask you one small favor as we go through the day, as we go through the morning. It would be really useful if on the chat, privately to Pauline if you like, you put on there a few words as to what you think about conference this year and how it has gone. Yesterday, we had presentations from Maria Cairns of the Co-op Bank and from Rob Graham from Tesco. And those sessions, that session and the Tuesday session, will be available on YouTube if you've missed them. And as we did yesterday, before we get this morning's session started on the chat, would you tell me in one word, what stuck in your mind from yesterday? What's the word that you took away from yesterday's session? If you just type that into the chat for me, it would be really helpful just to see what it was that you were thinking I was about to say as you drove home, but of course you didn't drive home, possibly as you went to put the kettle on and make a cup of tea. So if you'd put that on the chat for me, I would really like to pick up what you're thinking. Hybrid workforce values coming up there, resilience, consistency, support, resilience, well-being, mental health, positive, agile, collaborative, well-being. Well-being keeps coming out there. And that was my word from Tuesday. My word from yesterday was humanity, and Maria used it, and it's been bouncing around in my head ever since, because for me it sums up how all of those concerns about each other's well-being that we've been discussing over the past 2 days, as to how we encourage that humanity towards our customers and our colleagues. And I think we'll probably be talking about that quite a lot through 2021. And so to this morning, I would like to thank our sponsors, the gold sponsors, Ring Central, Twilio and T-Tech, our silver sponsors, Polly and Tisky, and our research partners, Contact Babel. The first speaker today is David Graham, who is from Diplomatic Rebels, and following David, we'll have that industry debate. Does digital first put the customer last? We'll be asking a couple of poll questions during that, so we would be very grateful if you could respond to those. The comfort break is followed by 2 final presentations of the convention. Patricia Dreghorn from Ofgem and Helena Gilmore and Pete McGinn from Beano Studios. And then finally, as if by magic, Kevin Quantum will take us through an award-winning magic performance. So without further ado, let me introduce David Graham from Diplomatic Rebels, doing what rebels do best, disrupting and innovating. And he has a presentation for us. Then he will be with us to answer a couple of questions. Post those on the chat, and I will try to pick them up as we go. Take it away, David.
Hey guys, I'm David Graham. I'm happy to be here and sharing some of the insights that I picked up over the years as I've been working in large corporations with radical innovation over the last 17 years. I've been in the wind power business, I've been in the aviation business, and for the last 10 years, I've been with Lego. So I'm going to share with you some insights on how to drive and lead radical innovation in large organizations and how to thrive as an entrepreneur. You know, it's hard work leading change and radical innovation, especially in large organizations. So how do you do it? How do you do it impactful, effective, and without burning out? So I'm looking forward to now sharing that with you. So let me just share my screen here and start. So I'm going to talk about how you as an entrepreneur can drive the change from within the organization. But the first question to talk about is really, why do we need radical innovation? Isn't it easier just to stick to what we're good at and stick to our core capabilities? Isn't that what everybody said, throughout the years, that you should do what you're good at? And you're right, that has been true for many years, but the challenge now is, and I'm guessing you all know that, but radical is sort of the new normal. And what does that mean? It means that the time you have from something is radically new in the market till it's a mainstream commodity gets shorter and shorter. So the time you have as a pioneer to recoup on your investment get shorter and shorter. And as a second mover, and most bigger companies are second movers, which means they'll be sitting around waiting for somebody else to do something before they move in, you basically have no time to catch up. So the challenge is, how do you cope with that? And the real question here is not so much to ask, what's going to change and when, because that's hard to foresee. The real question to ask is, how do we take a lead on this change? How do we put ourselves in front of what's happening and be the driver of these changes? And to do that effectively, you have to build a capability of exploring and experimenting with new offerings. Constantly exploring with what's changing within user behaviors, with new technologies, with new business models, with new user segments. So you're constantly learning about what are the right opportunities for us in the future. And you sort of need to adopt the scientist mindset. Scientists are really good at experimenting with combining new components. What happens when we put this component together with this? And oftentimes the biggest inventions coming from scientists are from their mistakes. When they fail, when something unanticipated happened. And we sort of need to adopt that same mindset of saying, how can we become really good at constantly experimenting, putting new things together, failing, but doing it in a way where we are learning and where we are de-risking, meaning being more agile and nimble about it. And obviously it's also about launching, getting to market quicker than in the old days of corporate innovation. Very quickly getting into the market, get real live data to understand what's going on. So what's the problem, you might ask? Why is it that it seems that large organizations are really struggling with experimenting and exploring new radical and disruptive solutions and innovations? And oftentimes they're more looking to smaller startups to do the heavy lifting on these things. Well, it's a challenge. And that is, when big companies grow up, or as they grow up, they tend to stop experimenting. And so do we as adults, actually, right? When we grow up, the older we get, the more likely we are to stick to what we're good at, to stick to what we know. We don't want to expose ourselves and look foolish or fail in front of other people. So we become more and more conservative, and we double down on the things that we're already good at. And that's the same thing that happens in large organizations. They double down on what they're really good at, and they stick to it. And it becomes increasingly more difficult doing something new. And that's why they then rely on startups, because they have that youth and young, entrepreneurial spirit. And actually, we're all hardwired to experiment. Because as kids, we did nothing but experiment. That's the only way that kids learn how to talk, how to walk, how to do anything. And when a child tries to stand up for the first time and tumbles over, the parents don't go to that child and say, well, that's a failure right there. I hope not. I hope instead they go to that child and say, well done, try again, see if you can improve your technique. And somehow we need that same mindset in our organizations. How can we constantly encourage our employees, our peers, to experiment, to learn, daring to fail and get up again? Because if we don't, we become rigid and stuck. And that can happen in our personal lives. And when it happens to companies, it can be deadly. And we've seen numerous cases of companies falling from the heights when they got stuck on their existing way of doing things. So there is a need for an entrepreneurial culture in our organizations, because the entrepreneurs are those that are constantly challenging what is. They're curious, they're exploring. They're like the entrepreneurs, but inside the company. But how to build that? And the challenge that we've seen over the years is that in many large organizations, entrepreneurship or innovation in general tend to fail. Many innovation labs open up and they close down again. So I put up some of the things that are crucial in succeeding with innovation, and especially radical innovation. And first and foremost, you need a clear long-term direction and purpose with your innovation. I've seen too many companies where when they're doing their main business, they have a very, set strategy and know exactly what they want to do. But when it comes to innovation, they're sort of randomly exploring stuff. You need to be equally strong at setting clear directions and identifying opportunity spaces for what it is you want to do. Also, many companies don't have the right structure of governance. meaning it's going to take way too long getting into a market and they're making the wrong decisions. Or the tools they have is not the right ones. They need agile tools to quickly move forward. Or the teams may be measured on the wrong KPIs. So instead of measuring them on their ability to explore new territory, they only measure on, when are you creating top line results for the company? And that will pull them in the wrong direction. Or you might even have set the wrong team. So they don't have the necessary skills, or maybe they have the wrong attitude. Maybe they're too arrogant. Maybe they're not collaborative enough with the surrounding world. So in the next slides, I'm going to just cover how to tackle some of these things. And first and foremost, it's about setting clear opportunity spaces. You don't want to be boiling the ocean when you are exploring new territory. And you do this by really understanding what is changing in the world. Immerse yourself in those changes. You need to understand what's happening at ground zero, reading the weak signals out there. And when you gather all these insights, you can sort of organize them so you have all the different user insights, you have your new technologies, your new business models, your new geographies, whatever it is, and then you do pattern recognition. Like, what are the patterns? And connecting the dots across that. What happens if we take this user need with this new technology, with this new business model, and put it together? And like that, you identify opportunity spaces that then becomes clear areas of interest where you can also leverage your existing core capabilities. Now at Lego, they identified these two clear opportunity spaces. One is digital play. How can Lego as a company make digital play become more creative, more about empowering users to have creative skills and capability? That's a big task. The other one is education. How can Lego take its core values and capabilities around creativity and learning and playfulness into the educational system and transform that? So these are two clear areas that the company is now pursuing based on its insight, knowledge, and understanding of those spaces. But when you need to execute, then you need multiple innovation teams. Often in the old days, there would be just one big sleepy innovation team at the core of the company. And the challenge would be that they would come up with great ideas and concepts and whatnot, but very few of them would see the day of light in the market, and even fewer would be scaled because there wouldn't be a capability to actually take them to market or even to scale them further. To be able to do that, you need innovation capability across the entire value chain, in your marketing and sales department, in your production, even in your business support area, your finance, your legal, your procurement. They should also be innovating alongside with you. What are the future type of contracts we need to make with vendors or partners? How do we source these new type of materials, maybe through startups, etc.? So somehow the entire value chain need to be part of your innovation effort and not just in one isolated lab. So innovation projects should be run really like lean startups. And this starts with being able to produce prototypes and prototypes very quickly. And there is a reason why I'm saying prototype here, because if you tell an engineer or designer to create a prototype, they think they have to make something that actually works, which can take anything from months to years to build. Now, instead, if you create prototypes, you pretend to have a prototype. You're basically faking it. And the visual here is an example from IDEO, where they had to build an app for a client for kids. And instead of pulling in coders and starting to code and build the app, they printed an iPhone on a foam board. The foam board is hanging from the ceiling. They carved out a hole where the screen is. The guy's standing behind. She's in front. She's recording on a laptop. And when she pokes, he responds. And in about 2 to 3 hours, they had recordings of 3 to 4 different conceptual directions. And in the subsequent hours, they had kids in to review these. And they would get a sort of real emotional response from the kids on whether they thought the interaction was fun and engaging. And in just one day, they already had some clear indications on which of the directions are most relevant and interesting. And that's the type of speed you want to have. That's what it means to be lean, to move very quickly from idea to concept to test. And then you also want to move in through multiple iterations. So at Lego, we would run in 2-week work cycles, which means on the Monday of the first week, the team would formulate the hypothesis into the opportunity space and say, we believe that if we do this and this, then this will happen. Then they would create their prototype. They would test it with kids. And on the Friday of the second week, they would evaluate the results with management to understand what are we changing, which of our assumptions was right, which was wrong, what do we do the next 2 weeks. And the advantage of this is that any team can only run in the wrong direction for maximum 2 weeks. And then they'll be confronted by real users saying, that's not exactly fun and engaging. Finally, you want to do market validation through pilot launches. So really important to get all the way into the market to be able to validate. And this will also help you in arguing for the projects to upper management. If you actually had it in the market, if you have real life data from users, if you've seen it in the environment of the real use situation. And finally, it's about measuring the performance in the right way for these teams. There's a challenge here that often innovation teams are being measured like the rest of the organization, so mainly focusing on the end result. You know, when are you delivering top line results? But that's not the way to measure radical innovation teams. Rather, you want to use the same mentality as a venture capitalist portfolio manager. Because first and foremost, you need to realize they don't need multiple bets to have one right. And 9 out of 10 of your bets are going to fail, but that 1 out of 10 might succeed. So multiple bets. And then instead of only looking at end results, which is not meaningful, you instead look at how are these teams able to move from one milestone to the other. What's the experimentation velocity? How quickly are they uncovering new territory, building new capability, validating hypotheses? Those are the teams you want to bet on. That's the performance you will be measuring and rewarding. So in summary, you don't want to aim to get it right the first time. You want to aim to iterate. And that's very tempting. Back to these large organizations, they want to get it right the first time. They don't want to fail. They don't want to look foolish or wrong. It's the fear of failing. And we know it from our own personal lives. So we need to move beyond that. But the final challenge is, how do you then cope with the resistance as an entrepreneur? And there will be resistance. When you are driving these radical innovation projects, a lot of people will not be able to understand why this is important, why this is necessary, and what it is at all. And so this is very hard, and it makes it hard to be an entrepreneur. And typically, in my experience, 2 things happens to entrepreneurs. Either they give up and do as they're told, or they burn out and leave. And lately, what I'm seeing is that the new generations, the millennials and Gen Zs, they don't even want to start. They don't want to get stuck somewhere in a silo in a large organization and have zero impact. So that's a growing challenge for companies. How do they attract and retain these entrepreneurs in the future? So that's why I developed what I call the 5 habits of high impact entrepreneurs. Because there's a trick to the trade. There's a way to go about how you actually behave and lead innovation in order to be successful. And the first habit is to accept the resistance. Understand that it will be there, and it's for natural human reasons. It's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of what will happen to me if this happens. Or it's just that it's confusing and distracting from what people are otherwise doing. So don't take this personally. That's why people burn out. It's when they take the resistance personally. Instead, understand that it's natural, that it's there, and try to start to figure out ways to diffuse it or to manage it. So just a couple of stories on how I have been dealing with this in my career. So at Lego, we were facing this, lots of resistance on many of our concepts and ways of working. So we realized that the teams were under a lot of pressure, and they were struggling to maintain their motivation and passion. So we actually started researching a little what other teams out there are also facing hard odds and a lot of resistance. And we actually looked at U.S. Navy SEAL teams, because obviously, they're facing a lot of hard odds when going on a mission. And if they're successful, nobody will hear about it because it's secret. And if they fail, they'll likely be dead in a ditch. Obviously, it's not that bad for innovation entrepreneurs, but still there's something about how do they cope with that. So we invited some Navy SEALs in to our lab to talk about how they deal with this. And one of the things we learned was that they spend a lot of time after each mission on debriefing, basically crying out on each other's shoulders, but also really learning from what happened. Why did you do this? What happened to this guy? You know, what can we improve in our technique, in our operating model, etc. So based on this, we decided to create something similar at Lego. So we created what we call safe houses. And it's basically meetings where we meet in a place that's safe, where there's psychological safety, meaning here you can cry out on each other's shoulders. Here you can really talk about the hard stuff behind all the objectives with your projects. You know, why was this stakeholder really against us? What happened here? I'm feeling really fatigued with these things. So it's a space where you learn, where you grow, where you evolve as a team, as an individual. That turned out to be very powerful in creating psychological safety for the teams. Secondly, we also created a number of principles, which is a little like the ethos for the team, you know, something they live by. And this helps them to create legitimacy around the way of working that the teams have chosen. And that's very important so that they can constantly defend themselves against the rest of the organization when they're saying what you're doing is not valuable, what you're doing is not legitimate. So they build these principles and say we're sticking to them and we believe it's right. Second habit is only to break the rules you understand. And you will be breaking a lot of rules, both formal and informal, to be able to succeed with your new radical innovation projects. But you need to understand, why were these rules there in the first place? What do they serve? Who's guiding them? And whose toes are you stepping on as you are breaking them? Because you need to be able to pick these people up as you move along. And also you really need to be able to build a bridge between what was and what needs to become. That includes the story of why do we need to change these rules? Why can we no longer do things the way that we've done maybe for the last 50 or 100 years? So this is about really understanding the core of the company. And at Lego, in Innovation Lab, we called ourselves Lego fundamentalists, because we knew we needed to know even more about the core values and aspects of Lego so that we constantly could tell the story of why that was still true, but in this new reality that we were building. So just ways of dealing with that. One is to make sure that you tie every experiment that you have very closely up to your mission and strategy. So that means you start by setting a very strong mission and strategy for your innovation efforts. You identify these opportunity spaces, which becomes very clear, and you have a lot of stories to tell about these spaces and why they're relevant for the future of your company. Then you create these hypotheses, which is basically the beliefs you have. We believe that if we do this and this, then this will happen. And then you run an experiment to explore that. So if somebody asks, why are we doing this seemingly irrelevant project at the fringes of the company, you can tell a strong story about how that leads up to the very essence of the purpose of your company. And let me also share a story of actually leveraging the system. So you will be breaking rules, but there will also be rules that you maybe should not break. So I have a personal experience from a project that I was running. It was called Life of George. It was the first experiment where we had real physical bricks and a digital app that worked together. So it was a very simple game where you were following this guy, George. He would be taking pictures of stuff, and the pictures were in the app, and you needed to build them with physical bricks as a two-dimensional model. So, but when you started building, there was a timer. So you needed to build as fast as possible. Once you built the model, you would place it on this small board, and you would scan it with your phone's camera. And it would actually read exactly what did you build, what colors, what shapes, and give you points based on accuracy and speed. Very fun, small game. We launched it very quickly in the market. And normally it takes up to 24 months in the stage gate model at Lego to launch something new. We did it in just 6 months. So we were bypassing a number of the rules and processes and procedures. And unfortunately, we also ended up making a big mistake. So on the packaging, it was indicated what devices will work with this game. And that's very important, because otherwise you have people buying the product whose device, iPhone, phone or tablet, will not work with it. Unfortunately, we made a mistake there and wrote the wrong thing. It got launched and just up to Christmas, and we had to pull it back. We had to relabel thousands of boxes with the right information. And what I had missed was that there was a very clear checklist that one should follow that makes sure that you got all these things right. And I had sort of, in the speed of things, overlooked that and thought, we don't need it. It's going to take too long. Let's just do it. So that's an example where you still do want to leverage the system. Some of those rules that are in there are actually, meaningful and should be leveraged. Third point is building a tribe. So you want to create fellowship. You want to have more and more people be part of your project, supporting your project, being fans of your project. So try not to see your project as a project or as a product or service, but rather as a movement, something that's changing the very nature of the company and its own way of seeing itself. And to do that, you need to be very open and transparent and inviting people in. I've seen many innovation teams that sort of closing around themselves, keeping to themselves, keeping everything secret and hushed up. And that's only going to alienate the rest of the organization and create sort of a them and us culture. Rather, you want to open up and bring them on board. So a couple of examples of that. We did that in Lego, where we created, in our innovation lab, we created demo days. So every 2 weeks, there would be a demo day where people that were interested would be invited to come and see all the ugly prototypes that were happening in the lab. And through that, we had people leaning in more and more, understanding, why are we doing these things? Why is this project important? And they would even start to steal with pride from the stuff that we were showing. So over time, we would increase our fellowship in the organization. That was very effective. Also, what we started to do was to give back to the community, meaning back to the existing core business. So we would have a part of our team in the Innovation Lab allocated to support projects in the core business. So if they had a problem, we would lend out some of our people to actually support it. And that way, we connected the dots between the two different areas. Fourth habit is to write love letters, and lots of them. Because to create that fellowship, you need to be very kind and humble and respectful. It is the existing core business that's paying your salary, right? And in a way, you are standing on the shoulders of giants as you're looking into the future. And be respectful of that. Show that you care. Show that you respect the existing core business. But this is also about, if you can see there are some resistance and some people that are moving against you, let's say the CFO is trying to shut you down or is not understanding what you're doing, be proactive and reach out very quickly. Get the person involved. Make that person in the know about what's going on. Empower that person to feel inspired about what's going on. So that is what this means. And a couple of examples of how to do that. So we were in Future Lab at Lego, we were often facing problems, especially with legal, finance, procurement, because those are the people that sort of are policing the various different aspects. And a lot of the rules we were bringing were touching their area. So we felt, okay, how do we avoid constantly having a battle with these guys? So we said, let's bring them close. So we created hot desks in our office for people from these different departments. And to begin with, it was only the young people from these units that would come in because they thought it was very cool to hang out with the innovation dudes. Later on, even the senior people started showing up because they heard from the junior people that, some really interesting stories about what was going on. They felt that, by hanging out there, they would be in the know of some of the new cool stuff that would be coming. So soon over time, they became some of our closest allies. And later, these, legal, finance, and procurement started to create their own innovation lab where they, together with us, would invent what are the future way of legal contracts, what are the future way of sourcing new materials, etc. So in that sense, we brought them very close. It was very successful. Also, you want to be really good at telling your story. As an entrepreneur, you should really be a storyteller. Use any opportunity you can to get out there and talk to other departments, talk to other areas of the company, talk to your partners and vendors to make them understand what it is you're trying to do and how that's changing the way that the company works. Finally, you want to make other people shine. And this is about both it's about sharing the spoils of the wins, but it's also about making sure that what you're doing doesn't end up being a one-off. And I've seen several organizations carrying through an innovation project, but that becomes a one-off. It's hard to repeat, and you don't build that repetitive system. And part of the reason for that is that if you didn't make other people shine, if you kept all the spoils to yourself, the rest of the organization are just going to look at you and say, well, he's not going to get through that the second time around. So make sure that everyone that was involved, even those that gave you resistance in the beginning, are being rewarded, are being celebrated as when your project succeeds. So a couple of ways of doing that, I actually had a project manager on the team who always, when he met a new stakeholder or when he met a difficult stakeholder, someone where he needed something from them, he would bring chocolate. And he would be saying like, well, I was just in Switzerland. I picked this chocolate up for you. There you go. And though it seems like a sort of a silly and slightly bribery thing to do, it really, really works. People felt that he cared about them, and they just opened up more. So sometimes these small things really carries a long way. Also, what we did was to really celebrate every milestone achieved in our innovation teams. Whenever there was a reason to celebrate, we would invite the broader stakeholder network to join. So everybody felt that they were part of something amazing that was moving and changing. It's about balancing the spirit of the rebel with the skills of the diplomat. The rebel is that curious person that's constantly challenging what is, exploring new things. But you also need the diplomat who's able to have empathy for, the people that have resistance, who's able to navigate and leverage the corporate ecosystem and its powers. So really you want to become a diplomatic rebel. Thank you guys. That's all I have. Now we're ready to take questions.
David, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. From my part, anybody who recognises the value of chocolate gets our vote, but that was absolutely terrific. I've written down, accept the resistance, only break the rules you understand, build a tribe, write the love letters and tell the story, and make people shine. And they sound quite simple, but actually that's quite a list of things to do. Can I just ask you,
Sure.
It seems to me that business, you talked about small businesses, you talked about freelancers and startups, and of course they're out with the entrepreneurs that you're talking about there. But entrepreneurship, whether it's in a big company or outside, sometimes seems like a bad word. How do we change that? How do we change that mindset to understand the real value that those people bring to the economy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, in my experience, we are reaching a tipping point. I think where more and more individuals and companies are realizing that entrepreneurship is really driving a lot of value in society. And I think, especially coming from, US and Silicon Valley, obviously, but where the entrepreneur is really the hero that dares to do something that's highly risky, that's even potentially highly, unlikely to succeed, but still goes ahead and does it. And I think we've seen that type of hero, all along in our society for hundreds of years, right? Those people that dare to be bold enough to walk the talk and challenge what is, and we see that also in movements like Me Too and other things, people that actually dare to stand up against maybe a faulty system. And so, but I think, the lessons that I'm bringing in is that if you are that bold person to do it in a way where you actually bring people on board, where you don't just create conflict and it doesn't become too harsh, but you're actually able, with empathy and storytelling, to build a bridge for all those folks that needs to follow your lead and bring them into that future safely.
We at CCA do talk a lot about empathy and about storytelling. Do you think, though, that given what we are going through together and all our registered firms, all our members are going through all of this. They're sharing lots of experience, etc. Do you think that once we come out the other side of the pandemic, we may be more willing to innovate, more understanding of people who take risks, more understanding of that mindset because of what we've gone through?
I absolutely believe that. And I see it already at the top of large corporations, where often sometimes you don't necessarily see a lot of empathy, but actually where some responses from major corporations, instead of the usual sort of crisis response, which is to say safeguard, the core and safeguard, save ourselves. They said, no, wait a minute, we need to save the entire ecosystem that we are part of. How can we help the small vendors we have in our system by, paying them right away, or even paying them up front for services we will only get later down in the year next year, just to make sure that, the whole system is safeguarded when you are the bigger player in that system. And I think that also reflects the individual level, us as individuals. I think many people have had, gotten a global perspective of things and saying, what we do here and now matters also for the bigger picture. And how can we keep that mindset as we move forward?
I love what I'm hearing because I work a lot with small businesses, freelancers and startups. But I think you're almost saying you need to support the supply chain, but you need to support that internally in your own big organization as well as in your external organization. Exactly.
And I think, thinking more in terms of ecosystems rather than legal entities and boundaries is a future, leadership mindset as well. You need to be much broader in thinking, the boundaries of the company is not the legal entity part of, including obviously your customers, your vendors, your suppliers, but also the future talent you haven't yet acquired or recruited. And that's a massive mindset change in thinking. And in terms of how do we create value, not just for our shareholders in this legal entity, but really across multiple entities and individuals in the larger system.
David, I could talk to you all day. And unfortunately, we can't because we've got to move on to the industry debate. Paul has just asked whether you will share your slides.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. And this recording will be available, so people will be able to listen later. And people are saying this really resonates. So, David, thank you very, very much.
Well,
it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, and happy to be in person as well. Cheers.
Take care. Thank you very much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Now it's time for the second industry debate. We'll run some polling questions during the debate. They'll pop up and on your screens, and we'd be very grateful if you could respond to those. So the question is, does digital first put the customer last? And becoming digital isn't just about technology. It's about empowering people. It's about changing organizational cultures, developing new structures, both for employees and customers, and getting that optimum balance of business efficiency while having the best engagement with customers on the channel of their choice, of course, is the nirvana most organizations aspire to. But are we in danger of putting the customer last? Let me introduce Steve Morrell, who is Managing Director of Contact Babel, David Cousins, who is Sales Leader at Twilio, and Amanda Henderson, who is Solutions Engineer at Ring Central. Now, if you three could join me and put your cameras on, that would be very reassuring. Steve, I can see that you are there. There's David and Amanda. Thank you both. Thank you all three ever so much for joining us. Now, the structure of this session is that each panel member has been invited to introduce themselves and say a few words for about a minute or 2 minutes on how working life has changed for them personally in their organization. And then we'll go through a few questions which we'll put to the panel. Shall I start with you then, Steve, as I noticed you first?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Hi, everybody. Mine's going to be quite a short introduction because I've worked at home for the past 20 years. So to be honest, very little has changed for me. For those who don't know me, I'm the Managing Director of Contact Babel. We're a UK-based analyst firm formed in 2001 to study the contact center and customer experience industries through the use of large-scale primary research. We interview about 200 companies a year in the UK and also in the US for our annual flagship reports, which is the Contact Center Decision Makers Guides. The UK one will be out in early December. The early indications, as you might expect, show some huge changes in specific areas, such as home working, of course, and there have also been some interesting things filtering through in the benchmarking side too. And we look forward to sharing those with you within the report, and I believe that we're going to try to arrange a CCA webinar so we can kind of talk you through those in more depth as well, but that will come later.
Fantastic. And of course, there will be details of that come out to everyone as that is in the planning. Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself and a few words from you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Amanda Henderson. I'm a solutions engineer at Ring Central. And very like Steve, my role really hasn't changed in the last couple of months. I've worked at home for approximately 20 years as well. What I have seen is obviously my role is to help customers with their digital transformation and ultimately design a solution that is a good representation of their business and help them through that process. What we've seen recently is the rapid uptake of this service. If anything, we've been a lot busier than normal, and customers who maybe have been very hesitant to adopt digital strategies are now fully on board, and we're working with them to guide them through that process.
Thank you, Amanda. And David Cousins?
Good morning. So for those that don't know me, so David Cousins, I head up the contact center specialist team and sales at Twilio for EMEA. I've been in, I guess, the contact center industry since, gosh, the late 90s, I suppose, having been a humble advisor and started off my career in that sense. I mean, I think I've been quite fortunate, like the other two, again, Steve and Amanda, in terms of home working. I've been doing it for a very long time. But what I would say is I'm used to being on the road at least 2 or 3 days a week, being out and seeing people face to face and just breaking up, I guess, the monotony of video calls. You know, we made a decision really early on, actually, back in April, that we weren't going to open our offices again until August 2021. We're a communications company, so you know, we could hardly say that that wasn't possible or feasible. And again, as per Amanda's point, it's been busier than ever, but we've had to introduce some safeguards, you know, trying to keep Zoom calls down to a minimum of 30 minutes, making sure you get a break of 15 minutes in between, because otherwise it just becomes one after the next, after the next, after the next. And clearly, A, you want to be fresh for customer conversations, but B, you know, I sometimes, when I treat myself, I'll work in the living room just to get out of the office. So yeah, there's some changes we've had to go through, but we've been quite lucky that as a company, you know, everybody got a home working allowance. We all had the opportunity to sort of make home working comfortable. So yeah, some changes certainly in that regard.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, all of you. So the question that we have posed to you is this move to digital risking putting the customer last? First question, what are the top challenges we need to consider as we take this faster acceleration towards digital? I mean, I think we are probably where we expected to be in maybe 5 years' time. So we know we've accelerated pell-mell to this point. But, you know, now that we are here, can we stop, take stock, and consider what the top challenges are that we need now to consider as we then head into 2021? David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And by the way, I love what David was talking about, and I'm quite lucky that I get to work with Lego quite a lot at the moment. So again, can reinforce just how amazing they are in the way that they think and do things. But I think we've seen a few different challenges. I mean, as per some of the discussions we had yesterday, you know, one big challenge is the training wheels got taken away. We had to move forward. We had no choice. We were incredibly successful in doing so as an industry, but now we've almost set the bar quite high that, you know, well, why should we kind of fumble around and not do anything? Why can't we just do it as quickly as we have done? So I think One challenge is the ability to sort of hold your hands up and take stock and just pause. We've seen quite unique challenges actually around things like trust. So we do a lot of contact and trace around the world, which again is an interesting one in its own right, because as a use case, it really didn't exist before, March, April this year. But trust has been the big challenge with people, because again, there are unfortunately individuals out there that like to take advantage of things like that, spoof numbers, call people up and charge them for tests. So trust has been a real big one. The other one, I guess, last one for me, I suppose, is really around the challenge of making our experiences consistent. Back in the day, we used to throw technology at channels, and we ended up with this, Frankensteinian contact center tech environment. We've kind of done that a little bit again out of necessity. I mean, we've had customers that, built web chat overnight because they had to. We've had customers that have moved people home overnight because they had to. It's about looking at what consistency should be, and particularly in light of homeworking. I think we all have to assume now that a degree of homeworking will be normal, but actually the more channels we add, the danger is that we make them very different to what people are accustomed to. So, again, an example, Love Holidays recently did an event with them probably 3 weeks ago, and Eugene at Love Holidays said, I don't care now what the next channel is we add, because actually we've born and baked the process to a point where, irrespective of what it is, the agent's going to experience exactly the same. And I think that's the goal, really. But yeah, I've got a huge list, but I'll shut up for now, Liz.
No, we might get all of that huge list in, who knows. But if you're on the chat, then please do put your points and your comments and questions, whatever, for the panel. That would be terrific. Amanda, what are your top challenges you think we need to consider as we accelerate to digital?
I think just on experience, one of the challenges that we had at Ring Central was being scalable. We were very fortunate to be involved in the track and trace process with Sitel, so we had to spin up users very, very quickly in a very short time scale, and being able to deploy that rapidly was something that caught us quite by surprise, being able to do that. But fortunately, we have actually managed to do it, and it's been very successful. So much so we're looking at a further deployment later on this month. But I think what we had to do as a business, we had to prioritise what work was coming in and where we needed to push our resource to be able to deploy these solutions for customers. Looking at digital strategies was very different to what we've been doing in the past, where we'd maybe spend time with customers, sit down and design and build and plan. We didn't have the luxury of time. So again, it was, what are our priorities and how are we going to tackle this, and what resource can we throw at it?
So you really would like that time now.
Yes,
I think it's what you're saying. I think just about everybody feels that we've the velocity was intense, immense, and actually the impetus was pushing us along.
It was absolutely incredible, the momentum that we had to work with, the speed that we did deployments that we would normally, spend a lot of time in beta testing. We'd have a full, program. We just didn't have that luxury. So now it would be great if we were able to take stock of the work that we've done. And we're doing this internally at Ring Central. And we're packaging it up. And we've learned, by trial and error, what's worked and what hasn't worked.
But what about David's point that actually people have got used to this speed of operation, and they're kind of saying, why can't we just get on with it?
Yeah, I just don't think we could work at that pace consistently. We need to evaluate.
I think you're absolutely right. Steve, what's your top challenges?
Yeah, firstly, I think that we have to consider the preference for channels that customers have. So it's not simply a matter of offering, for example, web chat, then sitting back and theoretically seeing people choose chat over phone and bring your costs down, etc. Our research has found that different types of customer prefer different channels at different times, which obviously kind of muddies the waters. I'll give you an example. We found that complaints or emotional queries can often go to email. urgent queries are often solved via self-service most effectively, and complex issues will normally go to phone or even face-to-face. I'll always see that's dropped off a lot recently. I mean, this differs significantly by age and even socioeconomic group too. So it's kind of really important to understand your specific customer base and their likely requirements when you're planning your resourcing for digital channels and when you're promoting them via more expensive channels such as voice. So obviously you don't want to move people away from voice and find out, you simply don't have the chat or the media, social media agents available to deal with that because they won't go back to those channels. Secondly, and kind of linked in with that, we need to consider the cost per channel as well. We found that the cost of a typical inbound call is around £4.50. That's the kind of mean average. An email is perhaps 80% of that, and social and web chat perhaps a little bit less. So there's not a huge differential there compared to, for example, IVR or web self-service, which are pennies rather than pounds. And the reason for this is that the level of automation that we're using at the moment is very low, generally speaking. Most email and chat is still being done manually. So getting AI involved and through the use of chatbots, etc., voice bots, even in the simplest way, could give a quick win to the bottom line, which will encourage investment in more sophisticated functionality later on.
I want to put, just at this point, one question that's popped up here on the chat. Paul wants to know, how does the panel feel that organizations stroke authorities can achieve solutions and protocols for digital that recognize that many customers haven't got the necessary identification for, they don't have credit references, credit cards, passports, bills, driving licenses, photo ID. And many are not online or digitally enabled. And so a recent example, Paul says, is the change on premium bonds, which is switching from checks to direct credit. So there is a whole challenge here, is there not, for the customers? And while we're busily worrying about getting time to pause and think, worrying about building up trust and consistency and our scalability and our customers' preferences for different channels, what do we do about those people who are increasingly left behind, I think? Steve, as you're there.
Yeah. One of the things that we always say about when we're looking at digital channels, let's not get too carried away here, because the majority of interactions in the UK still come through the voice channel. There's still huge enthusiasm for voice. So while we're talking about digital, it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not the case that we don't have to support voice anymore, because for one reason or another, and that is an excellent reason that's just been given there, people will need to be supported in all sorts of different ways. So yeah, digital cannot solve every single problem.
David, Amanda, have you got any thoughts on that? Because I think there were quite a few complaints at the beginning of the pandemic that people had basically shut down their voice channels, and partly that was because they were trying to get everybody set up to work from home.
Yeah, that's right. We saw that a lot with our customers. They turned off voice and concentrated on emails because they knew that home agents could actually cope with email a lot better than voice, with all of the distractions in the background, like the children being off school. But I think, Steve's right, that we do have to offer traditional voice alongside our digital channels, because there's always going to be that need for somebody to actually speak to somebody to get something resolved.
I think the other thing that's kind of taken over a little bit as well for those within that demographic is the use of video. We saw, again, solutions that were a 2-year cycle to roll out video for GP services for certain CCGs in the UK, quashed down to about a 2-week cycle through need. Solutions like ZocDoc and Doctor on Demand, and we've even seen video for certain religious events and ceremonies. Again, a couple of customers that are using that for their Sunday service, for example, to ensure that they're capturing that demographic, but also trying to keep some degree of personalization, as per Magician yesterday, really. So we've seen that for sure. But I think it's not just, do we deliver WhatsApp to somebody that perhaps doesn't know how to use it? How can we leverage the channels we've already got and make them more effective? I think video is definitely one that we've seen a massive increase in.
And probably will see more. Bernard says, adding to that, vulnerable customers experiencing temporary and permanent vulnerability. And Sean says, our service providing information, guidance and support to people affected by dementia. We found that with web chat, the people ask complex and emotional issues, and so it actually takes longer for an advisor to deal with those. So things are getting more complex and possibly longer to deal with too. So given all of that uncertainty and given where we are, how do businesses know what to invest in? You know, where do we invest? And it's not just about the money, it's about investing the time, it's about investing our skills and human resources. Amanda?
I think where they need to invest, they need to, have a look at their digital strategy. It's something that they probably maybe have been hesitant in the past, and I think they need to be bold rather than just trying to stick a sticking plaster on it because they know that they need to adopt some digital channels. They need to look at a strategy that's going to, model the whole of the business, not just for what's happening right now. And I think, where they need to invest is, we've talked about traditional voice, but looking at other means to be able to contact people. Even simple things like changing operational hours. You could have chatbots doing very basic self-serve queries out of hours. So you're opening up that whole wider arena for the customer to contact the business.
David, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Absolutely. I mean, I think the other thing that we've seen a lot of is now that we've got a huge tranche of data for the past sort of 8-9 months, there's a lot more analysis going into understanding intent. Okay, there's been a lot of use cases. Again, I'll take somebody like a Love Holidays or anybody in the sort of holiday industry. Their demand completely shifted from I want to book a holiday to I want a refund and know when I can book my holiday for next year. And they had to adapt very quickly. And I guess back to Steve's point, automation was the key to that. But actually, as part of that automation, what you're gathering is a lot of information as to why people are contacting. So then you've got a decent amount of information by which to then move forward on to ultimately just learn from the whole process. And again, we're just seeing a lot of that and just, again, bringing that stuff to life really from that learning.
I do hope that wasn't someone falling down the stairs behind.
My house, and I'm not entirely sure what that is.
Steve, obviously, the more data we have and the more we understand intent, then the more we will be thinking about or be able to focus what and where we're investing.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think one of the most important things to consider is the drive for self-service that we've seen over the past few months. I mean, we've seen a pretty severe decline in phone service really across the board, and to be honest, often extreme delays in replacement live digital service as well. Emails being measured in weeks rather than hours. So this has meant that customers have been forced to use self-service, even those cohorts that don't necessarily want to do that or haven't done it much in the past. And when live contact, voice contact, for example, is available properly, I think some will prefer to go back to that way, but I do think others will stay on self-service as their primary channel. As it's become familiar to them, it's often less effort now. I keep going back to cost, but it's important to businesses, especially what's down the line. The cost of self-service session is a very small fraction of any live channel, whether it's digital or voice. So any appropriate use of self-service can see a very quick ROI for businesses. As I said before, having said that, there is still a requirement for voice and live contacts, and there always will be. So some of the stats that we've very recently come up with is that 1 in 5 calls come from customers who've tried and failed to use self-service. So the main reasons that they're choosing to speak to an agent in these cases, however, isn't usually because the functionality wasn't available on the website, but it's because their issue was complex or involves multiple issues, or the customer wants the reassurance of talking to an agent. I mean, these things aren't just going to go away because of technology. But something else to point about the kind of investment question is, while there's no doubt that the long-term direction of travel is away from live voice and towards kind of digital and automation, we should note that around 2/3 of inbound contacts are still through the voice channel. However, when we consider the customer experience investments that are being put in place by UK businesses, 56% are going to digital channels compared to only 33% into the voice.
I was going to say something about voice, but I'm not sure, I'm not sure if I should, but I will. Voice is hugely important in that human beings recognize voice right to the last. And so I think that, we need to really understand the importance of voice and the emotional connections that people, that help people behave in particular ways, help people feel reassured in particular ways. And so that's something I think that's really important to think about. But do we think that there will be a requirement for managers of the future to have better technological skills themselves? Will the advisors evolve to be digital coaches for customers almost? David, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I only think back to, my call center days, as I say, in a darkened room in Manchester many years ago. But, I had full visibility. I had everybody down the left and right-hand side, banks of desks, the ability to see what they were up to, the ability to see a hand raised, the ability to sit side by side. That doesn't really exist all that much. We were only talking yesterday in one of the breakouts. For those that have gone back to the office, they're 3 chairs apart, even just from an advisor's perspective. So that ability to engage with people digitally is really important. And more we're seeing requirements for people to be able to have that one-on-one digital conversation. For example, Whisper and Barge used to be something that everybody kind of asked for in a tender or a requirements document. Now we're actually seeing, I want to digitally be able to coach. I want to digitally be able to communicate, because it's not as disruptive. But likewise, I can't physically see somebody. I think the other thing is training. How do we, and we're talking as part of the breakouts yesterday. One of my customers that I was talking to yesterday morning, in fact, they've got a whole raft of agents that have never seen their office. They've never been immersed in the culture of their business. And so again, they're trying to find ways and means to manage and supervise those people that don't have that foundation that they once had. So again, there's definitely a need for, I think, some digital capability and technological awareness and appreciation as to how we can help with that.
You may have noticed that there's a poll has popped up on your screen. We really would be grateful if you would answer those 3 questions. What's the biggest challenge with hybrid working? In your opinion, to what extent has leadership culture of your organization changed throughout the pandemic? And thinking about the future, do you think it likely that more of your customers will be served using automated services? Evolving skill sets, Steve, on that point, do you think there will be a requirement for managers to have better technological skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, excuse me, that's not my really area of expertise. So if you don't mind, I'd like kind of ask another question there. It's like, will advisors evolve to be digital coaches for customers? And this is something that, when I saw this question, I thought that's very interesting, because this is definitely something that will be a vitally important part of getting these new channels and kind of, even automation up and running and people accepting them, rather than just going back to the same standard kind of, well, I've always called these companies, so I'll just kind of carry on doing that. So, it will certainly pay businesses to encourage their advisors to show customers how to use existing and new self-service options. And this will mean that some calls take longer, as we, coach, did you know you could do that? This is how you do it. Let's go run through it now, if you like. But it will certainly more than pay for itself in the long run. And something else I kind of like to bring in here is I see video and collaboration as potentially being a really key channel in some circumstances. I don't think, because video has been around for ages and ages and ages, and it's a technology been looking for a use case, for a purpose. Never really found it within the contact center environment, but obviously the last few months have changed things. I don't think advisors will appear on screen as talking heads just for the sake of it, but I would expect technical support in particular to use a lot of live and also canned video to assist communication between customer and advisor. And obviously this is going to be something that an advisor will have to be trained and skilled in order to, help people to do this. Obviously this is driven by the uptake in smartphones, but really it's through the familiarity that many people have with using video conferencing, which, in the past few months has obviously really driven things forward, as we can see today.
Familiarity, I think, is one of the key words that's coming out of this. Amanda, what do you think about the skill set?
I agree. I think, the managers will have to adapt and adopt digital means to be able to manage their teams. Collaboration tools being key, being able to talk in a group, being able to share things in a group environment, but also things like advanced chat, being able to do screen share, being able to coach and monitor, actually not sitting side by side with that agent. But I think they're going to have to completely change the way that they manage their teams, because the traditional metrics that have always been very key to a voice-oriented call centre are not there anymore. How can you maybe look at the average speed of answer on a chat when part of that chat has been automated? How can you mark an agent down for not, giving the correct introduction, again, when that function's been automated? Your average talk time is not going to be applicable when you're answering an email. So it's looking at the traditional KPIs. How do we now look at the digital technologies and be able to measure our agents and coach, develop them with the skill sets that they have?
And that is the question I'm just about to ask you. Nice segue, but I just want to bring in this point on the chat. In healthcare, voice and reassurance of same is still a very live issue for people. However, we are seeing channel shift across many areas. It goes back to the point made around the nature of contact, emotional, urgent, complex, etc. Can I just ask you on that point, Amanda, about measurement? We've got about a minute to get the three of you in. What does effective measurement look like?
So now we've got the advanced tools in that contact centre. We can measure sentiment, we can measure frustration, we can measure whether it's been a positive or a negative conversation, and we have the metrics to be able to feed that back to the agent.
Thank you. Steve?
Yep, if I've only got a very short amount of time, I'll just say three words: first contact resolution. It's a win-win metric. It's good for the customer and they can get on with their lives, and it's great for the business too, as repeat calls really increase costs as well as frustrating customers. Clearly bad if you want to win repeat business. And actually, I don't see that a move to digital will diminish the importance of first contact resolution at all. And it's absolutely, over the years, we've said definitely it's the most important metric impacting upon customer experience.
I love it. David, final word for you.
Final word, all of the above, but the other one I would add that we're seeing a lot more of now is clicks. And what I mean by that is, how many clicks does it take for me to fulfill a particular process? And if you consider the desktop ecosystem that we've now got, particularly on a smaller laptop, we perhaps don't have a number of screens at home. We're seeing people measure success by the amount of clicks. And again, by designing programmatically that environment, you can reduce the number of clicks. I keep using the term, but insofar as how difficult it is, so almost like an agent ease view of the world is what we're seeing a lot of our customers now measuring, which is, wholeheartedly quite different to the usual measures that people use.
I think you've heard me sitting on your shoulder. Saying clicks, David, too many clicks. Thank you very much indeed for a great conversation, all of you. David Cousins, Sales Leader at Twilio, Steve Morrell, Managing Director of Contact Babel, and Amanda Henderson, Solutions Engineer, Ring Central. Where does the time go on these sessions? Thank you very much indeed to all our panellists, and thank you to all our panellists indeed for being sponsors of Convention. Take a break. See you in 5 minutes for our final speakers and the grand finale from magician Kevin Quantum. Welcome back. And our first speaker after the break is Patricia Dreghorn, who is Managing Director of eServe at the regulator, Ofgem. And she's been talking to Anne-Marie Forsyth.
I'm delighted to be joined today by Patricia Dreghorn, who is the MD of eServe at the regulator Ofgem. And we're going to discuss Ofgem's response to the current pandemic, and in particular, the response to customer experience and, of course, increasing vulnerability. Welcome, Patricia. Patricia, can you tell us how Ofgem had to react right at the very beginning of this pandemic in terms of making sure that customers were not left behind?
Absolutely. Good morning, and thank you for including Ofgem in this very important discussion. At the very beginning, we looked very much internally at what we already had around consumer protection. Ultimately, consumer protection is at the core of what we, Ofgem, as an energy regulator, does. We already had quite a few very strong protections in place to ensure that consumers had a constant supply of energy, and we already had things in place that ensured suppliers treated all consumers fairly, particularly the vulnerable. There are some packages in place that I'm sure you'll be aware with some of the energy suppliers that you might speak to later on. There are some packages in place that really do protect the vulnerable. However, when COVID-19 began, it was very clear that we needed to do something else. We had to up our game, as it were. And at the outset, government itself centrally announced an emergency package with energy suppliers, which focused specifically on helping vulnerable consumers. Vulnerable consumers tend to be those on prepayment meters, not necessarily all. That doesn't necessarily cover all vulnerable consumers, but we tend to see the majority in the prepayment environment. So there was guidance issued to suppliers making it absolutely explicit that customer protection must be their first priority, as you would expect with any essential service. And as we moved into April, some suppliers took this very seriously. They used messaging on their phone lines, they used different channels to deflect basic customer queries away and to allow them to focus all of their own energies on consumers who had the greatest needs. So effectively, we worked very closely with the market to ensure that things were in place that focused on customer vulnerability and consumer protection and constant supply. Because the worst thing for us is when we hear, and we hear about it all the time, that the third sector are dealing with an increase in calls as a result of people not being able to pay their energy bills and finding themselves in a situation where they're in the dark or they have no heating, etc. If you're in a vulnerable family with, maybe an elderly relative or a young child or someone who's poorly, that's clearly not acceptable in this day and age. So we focused very much on helping suppliers put the guidance in place to ensure that vulnerability was top of the pops, as it were. Consumer Protection Market Report for the second quarter of this year suggested that customer satisfaction across the energy supply market had actually increased. We'd seen a 4-digit increase effectively from quarter one to quarter two.
Interesting, and I guess that's something that's just ongoing now. I don't think anybody expected at the beginning of this pandemic that we would still be in this situation, and I think recent events have shown us that obviously we're going into a cold winter probably, which means that more lockdowns. What steps are you doing now to say, okay, we had these measures at the beginning, we're constantly checking them, but there's going to be even more now? Is there more needing to be done in the face of, just as the government's doing more furlough for workers who are off, is there more things energy companies are going to be asked to do because of increased lockdown?
Absolutely. Winter's always a difficult time in the energy sector anyway. Bills increase. what we're seeing as a result of lockdown are more people are staying at home, you know, whether that's because they're furloughed or whether it's because they're working at home. But what we are seeing is energy demand is increasing and bills are therefore increasing, which has quite a significant impact on consumers. If we go back to what we were saying earlier, what we did at the beginning is we focused on vulnerable consumers, and we found that suppliers are taking it very, very seriously and are absolutely doing the right thing. Some of the things that are being put in place for the winter period are preloaded top-up cards. So when I talked about consumers who are on prepayment meters, what we're doing is working with the industry to encourage the issuance of preloaded top-up cards. That really helps ensure that people don't run out, you know, don't find that they don't have, one, they might be in a situation where they're in lockdown and they cannot actually go out, you know, leave their home. And two, it allows us to really understand where do we have vulnerable consumers that we can target and actually issue those kind of cards. I have to say the suppliers are doing a really, really good job of this. And, you know, there's a real targeted support in place. Does the target go far enough? You know, are there vulnerable customers and vulnerable consumers out there that between ourselves and the suppliers we haven't found? I expect that might be the case. But what we're also looking to do is work quite closely with charities to help us understand and identify where we can do even more. We have found that that some of our calls to our consumer helpline have increased, and we've also found that some of those calls are really quite distressing. To be completely honest, we have some people that are in a situation where they're just distraught. They don't know what to do. We view them as more than vulnerable, you know, and quite often contact a lot of the authorities to go in and have a look at the overall situation. But I do think as an organisation, for us, you know, as a regulator, but for everyone, we need to do a little bit more to understand how we can all support people who are facing vulnerability and really don't know where to go, where to turn. So there's some things that we are doing within Ofgem around training, around partnering with the third sector to extend our reach and our scope, as well as our own understanding in how to support people. Some of the things that we're putting in place as a regulator to get us over this winter period is we're making it a licence requirement now that suppliers put customers in debt on a realistic and appropriate repayment plan. So effectively, what we don't want are people receiving lots of red letters, dunning letters, putting them under a huge amount more personal pressure. We're looking for emergency credit to be put in place to help customers who are struggling to top up. Or to pay their bills, or, you know, even to just increase what's sitting on the prepayment meter. We're also looking for customers who cannot afford anything to work very, very closely with their suppliers and make it an obligation for the suppliers to do something to help them ensure there's continuity of demand and supply during this winter period. We'll continue, obviously, to monitor how consumers are supported during this winter period. If we identify either through the standard targeted reach campaign, we will then look to address this again with the suppliers. But so far, we have to say the suppliers have responded very, very well, and we all recognise as an industry that we all need to do more to get us through this winter period.
Patricia, how has the response to the pandemic affected you specifically as an organisation? You've mentioned of all the measures that you're asking suppliers, energy suppliers, to put in place around looking after customers throughout this really difficult period. That's obviously got a knock-on effect in your own organisation. We must have many, many more inquiries coming in. Obviously, lots of organisations having to remodel their whole working. It's hybrid model. We've heard that word so often. Some at home, etc. And also the impact on your own staff who are having to deal with incredibly difficult situations from distressed people. So what have you done, you know, for your own response in terms of you as offering customer experience to your customers? How's that worked?
We implemented a fairly significant, fairly substantial reprioritisation of our forward work programme. We did that immediately. You know, that was our initial response to the pandemic. There were activities that could not continue. So for instance, carrying out audits of people's homes, of people's equipment, of maybe some assets that we were responsible for, being able to audit became something that had to be placed in the back burner, given one, we were in an extreme lockdown, and two, even if we hadn't been, a lot of people were self-isolating, so access to sites, premises, domestic householders, etc., became something that was deferred for a few months. That in itself allowed us to release some capacity and to place that capacity on other things, other priorities. One of the biggest priorities being consumer protection, and the way that we in Ofgem deal with consumer protection at a first line level is through the inquiries line. So we have an inquiries line that effectively is there as the first port of call for many consumers who are dealing with some of the suppliers that we talked about, or who are dealing maybe with some assets that we have supported in terms of funding, and they maybe find themselves in a situation where to continue to support that asset, they need access to particular types of funding. So we in my directorate, we look after the inquiries, we manage that first line support to staff. What we initially realised is, one, the demand was increasing, but a particular type of demand was increasing, a type of demand that we were not necessarily trained to support. A lot of the individuals who are recruited into Ofgem and who've been in Ofgem for a long, long time understand regulation, understand suppliers, understand guidance. They don't necessarily understand how to deal with someone who is really quite distressed, someone who's in a pretty significant situation that could result in the need for emergency services to be called, for instance. So we looked at a couple of things. One, we didn't want to create a situation where internally impacted because they didn't have the correct training in place to ensure that the correct kind of well-being support to the vulnerable customers. And two, we wanted to ensure that the customers and consumers who really needed the support were prioritised. So we did a couple of things. One, we focused on reducing the times that the calls were available and encouraged, in the same way as the suppliers did, encouraged non-urgent standard queries to go through email, so that we focused all our phone line efforts on vulnerable consumers who actually needed voice-to-voice contact. And to support that, we also partnered with the third sector to improve our training, and that's an ongoing piece. If anything, I think our recruitment now focuses on, we need a mix of not just the demograph that we talk about from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but also a mix of skills and exposure. So we're looking very much to the third sector to help us, fulfill some of these roles going forward. We've worked very, very carefully and very, very diligently in addressing all of our targets and all of our response times. But we've done that in such a way that we've also maintained staff wellbeing. So, for instance, I talked about the split between calls and the routing and the triage between calls versus emails. We've only opened the phone lines for about 3 hours a day, because what we have recognised is quite often when you're dealing with someone who is really quite distraught, there is some follow-up work that's required. There's some contacting of other agencies that's required, or perhaps some suppliers, or perhaps some debt agencies, etc., to contact these individuals and help put the right things in place for them. So we've tried to ensure that we could deliver an end-to-end service, as opposed to the typical call centre. We'll take the call, we'll deal with it, we'll triage it, and we'll pass it on down the line, and it might take a couple of days before anything happens. We've been in a position where we didn't feel we could do that, and we felt that immediate responses had to be in place. Hence, we completely changed the operating model as a result.
Okay, so that's thank you for that, Patricia, just enlightening us just about how Ofgem itself is remodelling and changing its whole structure. That's such a common thing with other sectors, and of course all sectors are reporting that they're now dealing much more with consumers in very distressed situations. So the contact services that you have, your customer experience, if you like, now is sometimes the only place where people can turn to for help if they're finding it really difficult to connect with other people. How do you work with other organisations? You've mentioned charities, etc., but how do you identify what other people are doing in other sectors to help you on this journey of your own understanding? How do you work with other sectors, for example, finance or whatever?
Yes, absolutely. It's something I think we need to continue. We need to strive to improve. I think if anything, COVID highlights we're a small community, we're a small sector, we're a small world, at the end of the day, and we all absolutely should be learning from one another. We are striving to continue with that evolution and that learning. We're definitely not at the end of that journey. There's a lot to learn from others. One of the things we do today is we have a really, really strong collaboration network with the UK Regulators Network. That allows us to share knowledge and best practice and what things actually work really, really well. We also have a customer forum that we work on, that we participate on through BEIS being the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So we work closely on that consumer forum, where it allows us to hear directly from consumers and hear consumer voices. We spend a lot of time investing in behavioural insight, insight analysis, and we do a lot where we listen to products, and that allows us, when we're working on user journey research, we hear directly from consumers and how they feel, what it feels like when they contact it, or what it feels like when they contact a supplier, and what they would like to see improved. We've recently done some work with Britain Thinks, where they have given us some very, very direct feedback around how consumers feel in the energy industry overall, whether that be about how the market's regulated or how they feel that their supplier treats them. So there's lots of things that we're doing to try and understand a bit more about how consumers feel, what their needs are, understanding a bit more about their individual circumstances and their needs. I talked about the charity sector. We have partnered with the charity sector on things like customer vulnerability. We do it at an Ofgem level ourselves, where we take some personal responsibility for supporting charities across the regions that Ofgem works. But we also do it to try and learn from the charity sectors and identify ways that we can improve our journey, our experience, our customer experience, and effectively we use the charity sector to help us upskill. And as I said, I fully anticipate that going forward, we will do a lot more recruitment from the charity sector, particularly in first line contact type roles. One of the other things we are looking at is, can we use the charity sector to help us with our understanding of vulnerable circumstances? A lot of people who traditionally have joined Ofgem have maybe been graduates. They've maybe been in fairly secure environments. And what we're looking to do is actually ensure that through our diversity drive, that we recruit people who've maybe not been in such a sheltered or maybe privileged environment, people who've maybe been in vulnerable circumstances and lived in households where they've struggled to pay the bills, as it were. So we're looking to do a lot more of that, and we've partnered with people like Prince's Trust and so on to help us ensure that we have the right skills that adequately demonstrate and reflect the market and some of its needs.
Patricia, customer experience is becoming much more digital and automated across all sectors, including energy, obviously. And this benefits, but it can also risk leaving customers behind. Can you tell us just a little bit about what your thoughts are around particularly the accelerated digital transformation that's happening through pandemic?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the energy environment is becoming more and more digitized. The innovation that comes through the energy sector is immense. It's huge, and it absolutely can benefit customers. But there are customers who aren't quite ready for some of the changes that we're putting in place. I mean, one good example is there's a lot more competition in the markets, and that allows people to go online, do their comparisons and understand what's the best way to switch, and it really helps people derive much more value for money. So technology is being used to ensure that people are actively seeking the best deal. We internally, we look at this all the time. We look at stats constantly to ensure that suppliers are encouraging their consumers to switch. That might not be a very comfortable place for a supplier to be, where at the bottom of your letter, and you should be receiving it in your own household bills, that the encouragement is there. It's very much an obligation now, and we are seeing more and more and more of an uptake of people switching. So that's one thing. Technology has been used to derive value for money and make the switching process much, much easier. There's other technologies that again, we've been partnering very, very, very closely with the supply market to drive, such as smart meters. The more people are aware of their own energy use, the more they can manage it, the more they can control it. I actually had one of my own colleagues the other day said to me, his smart meter was just installed and he was running around the house after these kids asking them to turn off lights and turn off unused TVs and so of you. That technological advancements allows people to manage their own home energy consumption and therefore manage their bills and manage their finances a little bit better. So technologies like this really, really help a lot of households, and they really allowed people to self-serve in a way that they can get more for their buck. However, there is a risk. There's always a risk around this, because not everyone in the population wants to have a smart meter. Not everybody wants to sit with a computer. Not everyone is familiar enough with their PC to enter some of the data to actually access a switch. So we do recognise to make things as easy as possible. We've also found that with the advent of these technologies, risk is there along and create services such as price comparison websites that are not necessarily focused on doing the best thing by using for users. Sometimes they can make lots of promises and actually not deliver. We do not regulate third-party intermediaries, and that does create a little bit of a risk in that process. But what we would say is focus on the big suppliers, focus on the areas where you can see that some of the gurus that are out there are recommending them. Innovation, as I mentioned, is fundamentally one of our themes of consumer vulnerability. It's part of our strategy. We're constantly encouraging everyone to make products and services as accessible as possible. And there's lots of things we're doing around supporting innovation in the energy sector. Some of my colleagues are working unbelievably hard on projects such as Rio price control framework. That will do an awful lot to really help drive flexibility across distribution, and that innovation in itself will go beyond business as usual and will focus much more on how we support customers in vulnerable situations. So I think a lot of the work that's going on in Rio and a lot of the innovation that's been driven through there is really going to do everything it can to ensure that the market and the suppliers in that market are really focused on supporting customer vulnerability.
Okay. Thank you for that, Patricia. It's such an important point. It's something that is probably one of the biggest topics for all customer operations at the moment, across all sectors: finance, insurance, energy, everything. And this whole piece about how the digital transformation is helping people access information really quickly, but at the same time, when they need a bit of support, and particularly if they're vulnerable, they need to often have a more human experience, and it's blending these two things together and getting a proper balance as to what's required. It's not easy, and I guess we'll be looking at lots of future scenarios. I'd like to thank Patricia, to say thank you for all that insight, and I know that we're going to be hearing so much more about that, so thank you.
Thank you to Patricia and to Anne-Marie. And I know that we're planning a session with Ofgem in early 2021. And now it's time to introduce you to Eleanor Gilmore and Peter Peter McGinn. They're Directors of Insight at Beano Studios.
Good morning, everyone. We are Helena and Pete from Beano Brain, and we are going to take you a whistle-stop tour through the new generation coming through Gen Alpha and give you some things to consider about what they might look like in terms of your future consumer and employees. And I'm joined today by my colleague Pete McGinn, who has a vast range of experience working with lots of FMCG clients across the globe.
And this is my co-host, Helena, who is a multi-award-winning kids and youth specialist with over 30 years of experience in kids media and is an absolute authority in all things kids and families. And it's her thought leadership and in-depth understanding which really drives the Beano Studios and all of its content and brand success. So some of you may be familiar with Beano. It is a British icon and today has an incredibly high level of awareness amongst kids and also adults and notably parents as well. What you might be less familiar with is the fact that 4 years ago we actually relaunched as Beano Studios, and today we have three main offerings. Firstly, the creative studio, which is where the comic sits alongside our TV content. The flagship content is Dennis and Nash Unleashed, which you can see there. Then we have Beano.com, which is our digital hub, where 7 to 14-year-olds can interact with a variety of quizzes and polls and games and general laughs. And then lastly, our externally focused specialist services, Beano Brain, which is where Helen and I sit in, helping to connect brands with Gen Alpha and Gen Z. And
in terms of Beano Brain, everything that feeds that is driven by data. So whether that's the extensive interviews we carry out with children across every week of the year, whether it's our web analytics on site or the polls that we carry out with kids on the website too. And it's also worth remembering while we're discussing Gen Alpha today, it's worth taking a moment just to reflect on the standard definitions for previous generations and those cohorts. Generational understanding is really valuable, but it's also worthwhile remembering that there's no set standard convention in terms of definition. You can't say it's every 15 years or every 20 years. Often they're age related in terms of date of birth, but they can also be defined by major events that have happened throughout the world. There are global and regional differences, and sometimes if you Google certain generations, you'll see a slight difference between a US definition and the UK definition. And obviously a year isn't hard set. You may identify more with the Gen X, which is maybe 2 years younger or older than you. But there does tend to be a global consensus around the definitions. It seems to go quite organically. And for Gen A purposes, or Generation Alpha as we call them, we're talking about those kids who've been born from 2010 onwards. So they are the same age as the iPad, which just blows my mind when I think about it.
And this past year or so has been tumultuous for everyone, really. And just a year ago, we were heading to a snap December election. The Brexit date was top of mind for January. We hadn't had Mexit yet. The Australian wildfires hadn't happened. Trump was in unshakable power, stoking political fires, and no one had heard of COVID-19. So much has happened, and this has really had a huge impact on Gen Alpha. And we've been following them, seeing things through their eyes, following their lives, and understanding how they felt, reacted, and interpreting what this means to companies, brands, and businesses.
And just to take that back to generational understanding, it's worth stepping back just a generation to see how things were completely different. You know, prior to the last recession, we had a real sort of high disposability, want it now. 2007 started to generate the size zero debate. The credit crunch hit in 2008, and we saw things start to move back to the home and a shift towards traditional consumption patterns. The iPad, as I mentioned earlier, was launched in 2010, and we saw entertainment move into the home and we started to build our own entertainment hubs. In 2013, we started to hear about gender neutrality, and believe it or not, it was 5 years ago when Caitlyn Jenner started to drive the transgender debate. In 2016 was quite a pivotal year for media, because that's when kids' TV viewing moved from the live and the real time to catch up and other platforms. That's really when the TV industry started to transform. And 2017 was the whole discussion around Me Too, Harvey Weinstein. And as we move to 2020, as Pete mentioned, Black Lives Matter, a global pandemic. The amount of change and behavioural change that goes along with that has been huge. So what we want to do today is talk to you about 5 key behaviours that will define Gen Alpha, and then discuss at the end what that means for you. And the first one is around the ability to question everything. Gen Alpha have the world, the whole world, just a click away. And that, combined with their internet safety awareness and millennial parents who encourage them to speak out and question everything, means that they do have a tendency to question what's going on and challenge the norms. As you can see here, almost 3/4 already, and 10s and unders, talk about how it's important that they query anything that they see online. Nearly half are not happy if their parents are sharing their photographs online. So all you parents out there, better be aware of that. You're going to have older children querying what you've done about all those baby and toddler photographs. But that also means as well that they will cancel, they will move on, they'll challenge things as they see them. We've got a great example here where one of the main influencers that kids were following for a while, Ali A, started to lose audience because he was clickbaiting, and the kids called it clickbaiting. So they kind of know what's going on, and they will question everything.
The second area I wanted to cover was around kids being endlessly creative. It's important to understand that Gen Alpha's creativity spans physical and digital dimensions. So whether that's doing science experiments and physically making slime, to gaming worlds and things such as Roblox have been absolutely huge this year. Making videos with friends on TikTok, it really, really spans physical and digital. And what we've seen over the past year or so is that their creativity has really been harnessed in the world of video. So undoubtedly Zoom and Teams have been really important for all of us, but what marks Gen Alpha out is that how they've been using video. Yes, lots of them are chatting and catching up with each other, or through gaming as well, but the behavioural tail is very, very long and diverse and taps into a number of different categories. And these range, as you can see here, from quizzes to baking on using video, from schooling, which we're all aware of, particularly at the moment again, to playing with Lego, to doing exercise, to reading stories too. A real mix of traditional and brand new behaviours that are happening all on video. And I think Maya's quote here really sums up very nicely what's been going on, and the impact of just 2 virtual brands that few had heard of at the beginning of the year, Kahoot and Zoom.
One of the really important defining behaviours around Gen Alpha is their yearning for personal freedom, and some of the older members of our audience today will recognise some of this and probably welcome it. But it's a real desire for both physical freedom and freedom from digital devices as well. That's driven by millennial parents who probably grew up with stranger danger, older siblings who perhaps have grown up with device addictions and things like that. And there's a real sense that we have got to a real intelligent point around the offline and the online. So there is an elevation of the desire for freedom. Almost 90% of millennial parents say that they want their child to spend their time outdoors and explore independently. More than half of under 10s tell us that they often spend time away from devices and are choosing to do something else. You can see Josh's quote here about being able to go on treks during lockdown and how they were enjoying all those kind of things that we would remember from our childhood. And the kind of things that that's driving out in society is things like forest schools, back to nature, lots of activity in survival camps, and also a shift away from the glossy images that kids are served up sometimes to something that's a bit more natural. One of the most popular parts of YouTube for kids are family vloggers. And it's because they see people like themselves in real situations. So this desire for personal freedom elevates the real and the free and the ability to go and explore and test and learn, which is something, of course, that we talk about millennials not being able to do.
And the next theme is related to a very personalised experience and where Gen Alpha can discover things for themselves and curate as well. And being able to do this and discover things on their own terms from a seemingly unlimited choice is a huge part of what makes Netflix and Spotify and SoundCloud all incredibly exciting and appealing, a place where Gen Alpha go to and actually feel like it's their own. A quarter of them have also already experienced the likes of VR and AR, even at school, which is very, very different and markedly different to the general adult population. AR and VR is a really intuitive way for them to explore and discover beyond the normal linear boundaries that previous generations would have been used to. And it's hugely, hugely engaging for them.
And the final area, behavioural area that we want to flag up to you is around individualism. And I'm sure that some of you are already wrestling with this in your companies. But there is a real acceptance and desire from Gen Alpha around individualism. Almost 3/4 of Gen Alpha parents say that they expect content to reflect diversity. They also expect it to reflect different genders as well. And in fact, nearly 2/3 of kids told us that they don't think their gender matters, that it shouldn't be an issue. And that's not to say that they are pushing against pink. What they're pushing against is the labelling of pink for a certain gender. So what you're going to be dealing with coming through is the most hyper-personalised generation in history. And they will push against labels. They will push against pink for girls, superheroes who are always male or white, or makeup that is solely for girls. And that's something that you have to think about and challenge. And what's really interesting as well, that you will find yourself with a young workforce who will call this out, not necessarily in a bad way, but they will challenge it. And as you can see here from Selena, who not only challenged her mum, but helped educate her mum on something like Black Lives Matter. And they will participate in those everyday acts of rebellion where they'll call things out when they see them, and they're really willing to educate other generations. So around individualism, it's really about thinking about not labelling things and how you operate around labels and definitions. So what are the implications for Gen A as your consumers?
So the first lens we wanted to look at it as was through that of being consumers. So what did our Gen Alpha like as consumers? What do you need to understand about them? Well, firstly, we think it's really, really important for you to just to understand the generation itself. And today is a real whirlwind of Gen Alpha and what they're like. But by doing so, then you'll start to understand what they're like as consumers and also what they'll potentially be like as employees. And the one way to do this is to really get noticed by Gen Alpha by promoting and engaging non-conventional education and work practices. That will absolutely get their ears pricked up.
It's also worth bearing in mind as well that Gen Alpha are predisposed to doing something. When we asked the kids at the very start of COVID, what would make you feel better about COVID and coronavirus, they immediately moved to solutions. So they said, close the schools. And they are a solution-driven generation. They can see a way of doing things differently. And they will stand up and be counted because remember, they're being parented by millennials who want them to voice their opinions. So we would say, think about harnessing their appetite for activism, but also problem solving. They'll think of a different way of doing things. Enable them to participate as well. and listen to them and get involved. Don't just tell them. This would be a really difficult generation to say, just do as I say. As I mentioned about individualism as well, it's worthwhile taking a step back and seeing the world through their eyes and how they behave. But also be authentic as well, but be brave, or they will just move on. They will just dismiss anything that they don't see as authentic and being based in reality.
We already knew that there was a generational merge going on between Gen Alpha and particularly millennial parents, but also their grandparents too. And this year has only really kind of catalysed that. And it's actually been one of the most inspiring themes of 2020. Just to call out the fact that Sir Captain Tom Moore is one of the heroes of Gen Alpha at the moment. I don't know how many generations he is away from them. But we believe there are plenty of opportunities for brands to embrace real-world traditional skills and activities and provide more occasions and products and experiences for families to come together. And both real-world and traditional skills and digital can be a part of that. And then lastly, in terms of digital mastery, yes, of course, this generation are digital natives and have an incredible understanding of the digital world. What's key for you to know is that is to give them that breathing space to allow for digital creativity and absolutely create experiences and products that are open to be hacked. They naturally want to hack in and find out how to do different things and explore, and actually creating an open experience will only harness that and only increase your appeal to them.
And then let's think about the implications of Generation Alpha as your employees.
So in terms of employees, and it's important to harness that innate creativity that we've talked about and their entrepreneurship as well in the work environment. But you absolutely also need to embrace the fact that rather than put any blinkers or restrictions on their desire to side hustle, it's actually important to let them do that. Gen Alpha will not be expecting just to do one thing and one job for life. Like, they will expect you to have a job and be doing something else at the same time. And it's really important to acknowledge that and to encourage that too.
Yeah, and I think our survey, Pete, found that 20% of kids had already sold something that they had made themselves. So already at the age of 10, they've got an entrepreneur streak going on there as well. And when it comes to young activists, think about your current practices and ethos and how are they fit for purpose? Do they fit with this generation? We have discussion with teenage girls and teenage boys about things like school uniform. They don't necessarily push. They're quite a conservative generation. They don't push against school uniform as a whole, but what they do push against are things that are illogical. Why does a skirt, they understand why a skirt has to be on the knee, but why does it have to be below the knee? So things like that, things like toilet breaks and stuff like that, they will push against that, but what they will also do is come up with a solution as well. The other thing to bear in mind in terms of activism is that with everything that's gone on around coronavirus and all the changes that have happened, their main institution in terms of respect will be the family. They will see their working life in terms of their family and how it impacts them and their family, and that's something for you to consider as well. In terms of post-stereotypes and individualism, absolutely one size does not fit all. It's going to be a challenge for you going forward with employees, but do keep policies up to date. And we would say involve Gen Alpha in their creation, because they are, as Pete has said, highly creative and will come up with solutions for you. And when it comes to the new old-fashioned, just embrace opportunities for cross-generational activities. Gen A actually have a lot in common with boomers, for example, and both ends of the spectrum can benefit from that. I would think that you could really benefit as a business to have the teaching going on at both ends of that spectrum as well. So don't necessarily think that they are coming in as newcomers. Think about valuing them for their knowledge and skills, as well as they will value their senior colleagues too.
And then lastly, in terms of digital mastery, obviously it's going to be really important to learn from and champion Gen Alpha's tech skills. But I'm going to flip this one on its head slightly. And we think it's actually really important not to lose sight of real world face-to-face experience. To Gen Alpha, this actually can be very exciting and quite an original and different element of life compared to their main non-working life as well. So don't forgo face-to-face in non-COVID times, obviously.
And obviously, post-coronavirus, Pete, it's important to have that engagement, especially for the younger generation too.
Yeah, we know that's something that the younger generation have really missed during lockdown, more so than older people who live with family and have other people around them. But for those younger generations, absolutely, they're really missing that face-to-face contact.
And finally, what we want to do is a bit of a passion project for us, but we want to leave you with the thought that you might want to consider the disproportionate effects of the last year on Gen Alpha. From early lockdown, where the lack of access to open space, there's over 1 million kids in the UK have no access to a garden, for example. And now most recently, the impact on schooling, the mixed messaging that they're receiving about failure and falling behind. And also we are seeing increased isolation in some of the lower socioeconomic groups who are driven by fear and are shielding children at home rather than sending them to school and receiving all the benefits that the structure of school and socialisation does for them. So consider that going forward, because I think the effects of the last year will be a long time in the making, and you will probably see that coming through in terms of employees. However, we sincerely believe that Jenny are an inspiring generation. They are an activated and solution-focused generation, and employers in particular will have much to learn from them. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you ever so much to Helena Gilmore and to Pete McGinn. Helena is with me. Helena, that was as you said at the beginning, it was a whistle-stop tour. However, I have to say, I think I'm now scared of 10-year-olds as just to what power they will have. But why is Beano doing this?
Good question. It's one we're asked quite often. Around 3 or 4 years ago, we transformed as a business. So we are no longer all about the comic, although the comic is still really important to us. We are now Beano Studios, and we consist of 3 distinct parts. One is a TV studio, and that's around looking at all our IP. We have a massive archive of work, really creative and imaginative work that stretches over our 80 years of existence, not just from Beano, but from classic comics such as Jackie and Bunty and Diana and all the things that we all grew up with. So that's around mobilising that. We also have a digital network. So we have over 2 million kids a month on Beano.com. Both in the UK and I'm sure you'll be really surprised to hear the US as well. We have more than 1 million US kids on the site every month as well, engaging with lots of different content, quizzes and polls and things like that, games. And then the final part we have is our services for brands, and that's where Beano Brain sits. And that came about essentially because brands came to us and said, hey, how have you managed to do this transformation over the last 3 or 4 years and make the Beano brand relevant again? And how can you help us? Can we get involved? Can we get involved in the website and everything? We felt we were passing on a lot of knowledge and information that we had gleaned over literally watching generations grow up. And we've begun to share that and help other brands and companies sort of benefit from it and mobilise it.
Well, I will ask you about that, but can you tell me what is it that defines this generation Alpha from other generations? You know, we keep labelling our generations, but there must be something that makes them stand out as from that particular generation.
I think there definitely is. There's a few things. I think the first thing to bear in mind is that they are, on the whole, they will be parented by millennials. which I think brings a distinct difference in. And millennials are known to place a high priority on being a parent and taking parenting quite seriously. They've also got some quite strong opinions on their own upbringing, and there's this real sense from millennial parents about trying to have a more rounded, more traditional childhood for their children. I think they are also growing up in much more democratic households. I mean, I grew up in a household where mum or dad was the boss, and now very much it's a bit like an SME actually, with everyone having a seat on the board, including the kids. So the kids.
I love that description.
So the kids they have a lot to say. They've got a big share of voice. And we know, I mean, we have stats that say that 23% of kids have encouraged their parents to buy green cars, for example. They're quite influential both in the shopping basket and things like that. So democratic parenting, sort of flatter structure as well. And then I think the third thing really is around, I'm sure you've heard of the phrase digital natives. Well, Gen Alpha are way beyond that. So the millennial parents were the first ones to, embrace social media, maybe have Bebo profiles and things like that, make all the mistakes that came with it. Gen Z came behind them and still kind of fell foul around some of the issues with social media. Gen Alpha are experts on digital media, but they also are really aware of the pitfalls. They're growing up with really good education from schools, charities, mum and dad having this conversation in the home about what's safe, what's not. And they've got a really strong sense of how to use media, how to hack it, how to use it in a way that's fit for them. So the challenge for brands and certainly digital companies is not to expect this generation to use their platforms in the way that they've been designed. They'll use them as they want. They're quite utilitarian and quite action orientated. So I think those are probably the three. Oh, and the fourth thing is freedom. It's around the desire to be free, not just from digital devices, and they will put a device down, whereas their older siblings may not decide to do that, but also physical freedom. And that comes from their parents, the desire to get outside and climb trees. So they've got a lot in common with their boomer grandparents. Boomer grandparents and Gen Alpha kids are a toxic mix. They'll be fabulous. They'll create chaos and rebellion.
It's all I find this all extremely heartening, but to come back to what you were saying about the brands and the information that you're sharing with them, there's nowhere for them to hide.
No, absolutely not. And one of the key things that we do stress when we're working with brands is around authenticity. Be authentic. Don't try to be something that you're not. Don't try to shoehorn into the latest issue of today because the kids can smell it. When you speak to an 8-year-old who can talk about a YouTuber clickbaiting and he's no longer watching them anymore, you can see that cancel culture, if you like, in operation. So you absolutely have to be transparent. But also there's an expectation. They've got quite high hygiene factors, if you like, quite high levels. If you are setting yourself up as an environmental brand, for example, say, for example, you're a confectionery brand and you have fair trade on your label, the children of Gen Alpha will also expect, as a minimum, other things to follow that, such as recyclable packaging and things like that. It's about, they will expect brands to walk the walk.
Is anybody doing it well?
Oh, is anybody doing it well? Yeah, actually, there are some people doing it really well. Interestingly, Barbie's a good example at the moment. Really tapping into the sort of individualism. The thing about Gen Alpha is they have no expectations. They accept people for who they are. So it's quite difficult often as a researcher to sit down with children and get them to talk about difference because they don't see it. And I think Barbie and Mattel are speaking quite well at the moment about difference, and they've had conversations around Black Lives Matter, also the way they're developing their toy line so that every child is represented. And representation for a child now is so important, because as someone was quoted as saying, you can't be who you can't see. So that's really important. There's a real push and an acceptance of difference, whereas we as a generation might have shied away from it a little bit.
Oh, I find that extremely heartening too. That's another thing that is really positive for me. I'm writing notes, by the way. But just before you go, and I know we're running out of time, you were trending on Twitter yesterday. Now, hark at me. That I knew you were trending on Twitter, but it's something to do with the Beano going to a grown-up version.
That's right. So what we've done this month is we've launched a Beano for a one-off special. Although the way it's been received, we may have to revisit that notion. It's a Beano for grown-ups included in this week's Beano. We've called it Beanold, and we're encouraging kids to pass it on to mums and dads, which they appear to have done in abundance today. It was based on a few things, that notion of the democratic family and lots of generations sharing things. Also in COVID as well, that's really with the whole coronavirus and lockdown and things, and we felt that adults needed as much of a lift as kids, and where parents have done a fantastic job of looking after kids' mental health. Kids worry about mums and dads too, so we wanted to give them something to laugh about, and everybody needs a bit of fun these days, don't we? And it's also populated, our team at Beano are fantastic at listening to the insights that we feed through them. So every single week kids talk to us about Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, they admire Marcus Rashford and his campaign, they know about Colonel Tom, they know about Dominic Cummings and his foray off to Barnard Castle, and that's all included in there. It's a fantastic feature-length strip, and it is laugh out loud funny, I have to say. It's gone down.
I am going out to buy a copy.
I would, but apparently it's got really, it's selling out, so yeah, get online and order your copy.
I had better do. Helena, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you again to Pete and to you for putting together your presentation. And thank you very much for joining us at the CCA 2020 convention.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you ever so much. And now it is time to get those post-it notes out, to get the pens handy, and to get your elastic bands, because Kevin Quantum is back, and he promised us yesterday that he would generate some more magic. And of course, Kevin is a Britain's Got Talent finalist. He trained in Las Vegas. He is one of our top magicians in the UK. So please put your hands together, metaphorically or real, whatever you prefer, and welcome Kevin Quantum.
Thank you once again. Thank you once again, Liz. It's great to be back, this time in a slightly different capacity again from the two times that I've been on the last few days, in more of a teaching capacity. And yesterday at the end of my performance, I demonstrated a small trick that I would like to teach you. And I want to show you that again just now. And it involves a post-it note. So I hope you've got a post-it note and a pen and elastic band handy if we get onto that. Post-it notes. And the idea is that when you hold it like this and rub your hand over it, you can change that smile frown into a smile, just like that. That's the idea. That's the one that we're going to learn. And that's what we're going to do. So just to put this in context as well, because learning magic might be a bit weird here, but I think we all understand now that we're all online, we're all on digital, we're all on virtual, and that idea of human interaction is often something that we struggle to get 100% right. At least it's nowhere near what it's like when it's a face-to-face contact. And really, when I'm teaching you this magic trick, I want to give you another skill, another tool for your toolkit. So when you're communicating online, you then have another way to engage with your team or with friends or colleagues or whatever, another way to make a point. Or if you just want to use it as a party trick to show your kids or someone else's kids, I don't mind, or just friends or whatever, this will tick that box as well. Right, so I think really what I want to do is give you the tools that you need for this. So do get a post-it note handy. What I want to do is take one post-it note or a piece of paper, a piece of card, something along those lines for me. And then I've got one here. I just pulled it off my pad. And you can ask you to fold it in half. So the sticky bit is just covered by the by the piece of paper just there like that. So you're folding it in half, you're making something about this size. If you're using just a piece of paper or a piece of card, then that's going to be the size that you're after. Then either rip down the middle, tear and rip down the middle as carefully as you can, or even better, grab a pair of scissors and chop like that. So then you have two kind of thicker squares of paper or cards or whatnot. Now I'm going to teach this in 3 sections. The first section I'm going to tell you is the secrets. The second section is the practice section. Then finally is going to be the presentation, how you are going to modify this for your own purposes. So first of all, the secret, and I'm sure many of you will realize that the secret for this one is that you don't just have one, but you have 2 pieces of paper with different faces written on them like that. 2 pieces of paper. So on these are the ones that I prepared earlier, and as I said, they used to say on blue, Peter, I want you to do the same now with your post-it notes, right? A smiley face on one, happy face on the other. And I'll just do that now. I'm sure I don't need to demonstrate that. You'll manage it yourselves, but smiley face, or you can draw anything, really, anything that you want to transform from one thing into another, whether it's going to be something, I don't know, smiley or unsmiley, or it can be lots of different options. I have a few here that I thought were quite interesting as well, just as a little way to do it. Maybe you want to talk about the weather and how a rain cloud is going to get turned into sunshine, something along those lines, something like that. It can be whatever you want, but just for the time being, maybe a smiley face and a sad face is the best way to go. So once you've got them ready, now I'm going to teach the secret to this one. And this is something that I also did a few years ago, a very similar trick. This is a little, I don't know if this was mentioned by Liz earlier, but I broke the Guinness World Record for the biggest ever magic lesson a few years ago. And it's a few of these tricks now that I'd like to share with you. So the idea is this, that when you're holding this piece of paper, you're going to hold it in your left hand. I'm right-handed, hold it in your left hand like this. And it's a bit of a weird kind of position because you're going to have your thumb at the top and then your other fingers underneath it like this. So you're kind of tucking your arm in like this. And if you're using your screen like me as a monitor, this is a great scenario to practice because you can almost have a mirror in front of you with your monitor right there. You're holding it like that. And the move that you're going to do is just let it drop into your hand like that. You're going to let it drop into your hand just like that. Now I'm tilting my hand a bit further forwards. When you do this, you're going to bring your fingers up a little bit higher. So when it drops into your hand, it's going to be hidden in this little space here. Now, even just by itself, that is a magic trick. You can just see if I do this, it almost looks like it completely vanishes. And that's a really good way to test it. So you're really going to move your thumb a tiny little bit. And when you move your thumb a tiny little bit, whoop, it just drops into that space right there. So that's the, I guess, the secret. Now to practice that, you're going to get your other one and you're going to repeat that move. But as you're repeating that move, you're going to bring this one that's going to be secretly hidden in your hand. You're going to bring that in front. And as you drop one, you're going to put the other one in its place and pull it back. So I'll do that from the side so you can see that. There's one there. This one comes over in your hand. You push that into that one's place. That drops out the way and you leave that one behind like that. I'll do that once more for you. Try and bring that a little bit closer to the camera. So that's there. That's already in your hand. That's the one you're just going to drop in your left hand if you are right-handed like I am. Reversed if you are not right-handed. That comes over there like that. Your thumb kind of pushes that one down and just drops that one in its place. And if you want to add a little bit of magic, because what makes a trick into magic is the little elements of you rubbing that frown away and turning it into a smile with your hand. And as you bring this hand away, you almost pretend like people might think you've got another one hidden in this hand, because the fact that it's hidden there is so deceptive. Then you just pull that hand away, do a finger motion, whatever you want to do, give it a little shot like that. So that's the secret. I thought I'd break it up. One of the stories that I have when I first started magic, I was on a reality television program about 15 years ago. I'm a millennial, I guess, for putting it in context of the last presentation, which I absolutely loved. I thought was really fantastic. I've got a 7-year-old daughter. It gave me a real insight into what she's going to become in a few years' time. And I think I'm going to be a lot nicer to her as well. And I was trying to hurry her out the house to school this morning. I've got bit of a dirty look, which I hope won't be recreated. But this is something from a reality television show 15 years ago. There was a show on Channel 4 called Faking It. The premise was to take someone in one job and then train them for 4 weeks to do a job that was completely different. A sheep shearer became a hairdresser. A minister became a second-hand car salesman. And in an episode where a physicist became a magician. And that's how I got into magic. I was trained by Penn and Teller in Las Vegas. I met Paul Daniels. Some of you may not even know who these people are. But this is a scene when I performed my first ever magic trick. And really, I hope it just inspires you a little bit when you practice and you don't get it quite right, that the more that you do give it a chance, then the more that you will get better at it. So let me just share my screen just with you just now. There we are. Share. And yeah, there.
With only 4 weeks to teach him a lifetime's worth of knowledge, Nigel's strategy will be to throw Kevin in at the deep end and hope he can swim. His first challenge will be doing close-up magic at tables right before his audience's eyes.
Hi, how's it going? My name's Kevin. I'm going. No, I'm Scottish. Can I follow you and ask you to be my audience for a couple of tricks? Okay, cool. Right, what's your name again, sorry? Okay, would you like to maybe pick a card for me, Jane, if that's alright? Just go for it. Right, what I want you to do is just chuck it back in somewhere. Alright, cheers for that. This is like one of your traditional tricks. I sort of go through the cards now and think, what's our card, what's our card, what's our card, what's our card? And then I find it, I present it to you, and you're all really amazed. Now I'm going to try and magic it so that it turns itself over when I throw these cards stick down like this. Right.
Unfortunately for Kevin, the card doesn't turn over.
Right. Let's do a pint, like.
There we are. I'll come back out of that. So that was my first attempt at ever doing a magic trick, quite embarrassing, on a reality TV show called Faking It. I'm not sure if you remember that. Write into the chat if you remember that reality television show. It was a real transformational one. And that's the thing about this trick. It is about transformation. So as I mentioned earlier, if smiley faces doesn't work, we're in a world right now where transformations are happening all the time. We're transforming from so much freedoms to lockdowns, from a world which had Trump in control. There's so many different transformations in our world, from the virtual world, from the one that we had real face to face. In fact, I made up one of those just right now. Another one that we could do. There's one that's face to face contact, and we're changing now from that world into one that is more all about screen time, just like that. There's so many different transformations you can use, you can talk about in this as well. And that's where I'm going to leave it with you guys. I hope that gives you another little tool, as I said before, for your arsenal. The ideal scenario is that you come up with your own presentation. Another thing that I used to do is, as a struggling artist, people often wonder how I can survive. And the way that I do that is by taking a £2 and by turning it into a 50 pence. It works for coins, it works for post-its. The same technique is used for all things, and then you can add just your one or two little sentences to make it about you, to make it human, to make the magic relevant to who you are. And then you've got another little piece, something you can show people over the internet or whatever. But do try and make it relevant. And thanks very much, Pauline, for saying that you do remember Faking It. I do appreciate it. And I think that's for me. I will have a Christmas show on as well. I do Christmas shows for office parties and things like that over the years. But if you're looking .com from tomorrow, and that'll be in December. I think it's the 18th. But it's been a real pleasure being with you. I've learned so much, especially about my own kids, which I'm now quite scared of, from the last presentation and from being part of the forums and the breakout rooms as well as the many presenters. Thanks so much for having me, and I'll pass you back over to Liz. I think who will take over from me from now. So I'll catch you later, guys. Thank you very much for your time. See you later.
Thanks to everyone for a great 3 days at CCA Convention. We've had some amazing feedback, and we know that most of you have been part of some or all of it. There's been so many learnings and so many comments back. Just to make you aware that you can, of course, take away little bits of it for your teams. You can just let us know which parts you want to explore just a little bit more, and we're happy to put those packages together for you. We set out at the beginning with a little bit of intrepidation. It was never going to be the same as our normal conventions that we've had over the last 20 years, but I think everybody will agree that the content this year has been absolutely fantastic. So I'd really like to thank all of our contributors, all of our sponsors, all of you for taking part in the debates and for making this such an interactive event. So it just remains for me to say, have a safe time, as we say in these days, and we're really looking forward to working with you throughout 2021. Thank you.